Okay, so I know every seat is almost filled in here. We got a lot of people outside and a lot of people downstairs watching the TVs. And I know the reason is because you've come to hear our keynote speaker, of whom I have the pleasure to introduce, Jose Antonio Vargas. You may not recognize his name, but you will likely recognize his story, which, for the most part, I'm going to let him tell you. I'll tell you that Jose is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and numerous papers in San Francisco. He was on the cover of Time magazine as the face of Americans who are undocumented but done hiding. He's a documentary filmmaker and is the founder of Define American, a nonprofit media and culture organization that focuses on immigration and citizenship. He's the founder and editor of Emerging US, a digital platform that focuses on race, immigration, and identity in a multicultural America. I think his passion and commitment are pretty well known. I don't know him. We met just this morning, like less than an hour ago. But we have talked via email, so there is that. But I believe he has important ideas to share. When I invited him to be our keynote speaker, I wrote to him that I had watched him speaking to teenagers in Los Angeles, where he said the mainstream media completely, utterly, irresponsibly ignore the diversity of the immigration issue. And I was so struck by that one comment. We're here to talk about that media coverage, so his ideas contribute to this conversation today, social justice. In that same talk that I watched from Los Angeles, he said, "Journalism is like church to me. Reporting is my religion." I love that. So I was like, okay, let's do this. So we're a journalism school. We're hosting an ethics conference for media professionals and educators and students. Who better to address this topic? Please welcome Jose Antonio Vargas.
Hi, good afternoon. How are you? I am in the end of an 8-day, 6-city travel schedule. So you're my last one before I get to go home. I'm really excited to be here. The last time I was in Cleveland was for the Republican National Convention. That was fun. And since you all are probably going to decide what happens in this election, it's always good to be back in Ohio. Actually, the last time that I was assigned here for 3 weeks was the 2008 presidential campaign. I was assigned to Sarah Palin. I got to know your state pretty well. Traveling, it's pretty a direct route. And around that time, when I was traveling, is when I was a political reporter for the Washington Post. I was the youngest political reporter for the Washington Post at the time. I think I was like 26, 27. It took 2 years to cover the campaign in 2008. And I just remember driving all around Ohio with a driver's license that I wasn't supposed to have, getting a job at the Washington Post that I wasn't supposed to have, having fake papers. I always was wondering how come no one ever really checked my papers. There's a thing called E-Verify. I don't know. But I think I had been doing that. At that point, that was in 2008. So at that point, I had been lying about my immigration status for 11 years. At that point, I think maybe 9 people, including my family members, knew that I was here illegally and that I didn't have the right papers. And, I don't know if anybody here read A Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. I was kind of like that guy. And I must totally be honest and say that, driving around Ohio following Sarah Palin around as an undocumented immigrant wasn't necessarily my idea of fun. And that was around that time is when I started to read this book that was actually recommended to me by a guy named David Broder, who I happened to sit right outside his office at the Washington Post. He suggested that I read this book called The Race Beat. And it's all about kind of how journalists, particularly from the North, covered the civil rights movement in the 60s, right? And this book was jarring for me to read at the time. This book introduced readers to a study called An American Dilemma by a guy named Gunnar Myrdal, who's a Swede, who was fascinated by racial divisions in the United States. According to the book, Myrdal was the first person who argued, quote, that the future of race relations rested largely in the hands of the American press. Myrdal said that the best antidote to racial prejudice and discrimination was the dissemination of accurate information. There is no doubt, he wrote, that a great majority of white people in America would be prepared to give the Negro, this was in the 60s, a substantially better deal if they knew the facts. Now, mind you, there was no internet, there was no social media. At that time, there were 3 television stations, the radio, and the newspaper, right? But who was getting to tell the story and who was getting to frame the narrative, right? So I'm reading this book, and here I am in Ohio, traveling around following Sarah Palin. And that was when it started occurring to me that my situation was not sustainable, right? Like, something had to give. So after the presidential campaign in 2008, I started thinking, maybe I'm in this privileged position, which I was and I am, as a journalist, having access to newspapers and editors. I've been a journalist since younger than you, since I was 17 years old. And so I thought that, all of us, I think, have our own kinds of privileges, right? And I think the question really about privilege is, what are you going to do to risk it? I think that's the question when it comes to privilege. So I did this. Isn't that the most horrible photo you've ever seen? It took 3 years of thinking. That was 2008 when I was in Ohio. It took 3 years of thinking, what am I going to do? I'm a reporter at heart, so I spoke to about 28 lawyers. It took about 7 months and a lot of money to try to figure out just how much trouble was I in. And against the advice of 27 lawyers, there was one lawyer who said, do it. He's the Filipino one. All the Jewish lawyers, because I really wanted a diverse perspective. I had Jewish lawyers, black lawyers, Latino lawyers, Asian lawyers, white lawyers. All of whom the Filipino-American one was like, yes, you should do this. I did this. Originally, it was supposed to be published in the Washington Post, because I thought I owed the Washington Post the story because I had lied to them. To this day, I'm indebted to the fact that I was able to be a journalist at the Washington Post. And I owed, a part of my Pulitzer to the Washington Post. I thought, hey, I should do it there. Then they got a little bit kind of nervous because in this piece, I wrote everything. I wrote about coming here when I was 12 from the Philippines. My mom sent me here. I wrote about finding out that I was here illegally when I went to the DMV to get a driver's license. That's how I found out when I showed the woman at the DMV my green card, and she said, this is fake. My grandparents who raised me here never told me that it was fake. They thought I was gonna mow people's lawns and work at the flea market and serve people drinks and babysit. They didn't think I would be going to college and doing stuff. And then I got a driver's license I wasn't supposed to get. Now, mind you, when I was trying to write this essay at the time for the Washington Post, my lawyers were like, you can't share everything, Jose. Because the moment you share all your lies, all the fraud that you've committed, there will be no relief. The moment you say in print that you have committed fraud and gotten licenses you weren't supposed to get, we can't save you. So I made the mistake of listening to some of the lawyers. So I hid some information from the editor, which you never should do. So then the editor of the Washington Post got a little scared that, wait a second, what are you not telling me? So then the Washington Post said, we're not going to publish this. Thankfully, there's a bigger paper called the Washington Post. No offense to the New York Times, no offense to the Washington Post, who said, we'll go ahead and publish it. Now, when I went to the New York Times, I told all the lawyers, never mind me as your client, I am doing this as a journalist. As far as I'm concerned, This piece for me was my Declaration of Independence. This was my civil disobedience. This was my way of saying facts matter, stories matter, experience matters, right? So then I published this piece, and then I waited because I thought, somebody from the government should call me, right? I had packed my bags. I had taken all the money from the Bank of America, given it to my grandmother to hide. I was really prepared for the worst. I didn't know what to expect. At that point, President Obama had been deporting about 400,000 immigrants a year. President Obama has deported more than 2 million people, 2 million immigrants, more than any other president in the history of this country. I don't know if Donald Trump actually knows this. So I'm waiting at my apartment in New York, and then nothing happens. And, I'm getting a little restless. I'm a journalist, so the story has to move forward, right? So I called the editor of Time magazine, who I happened to know at the time, Rick Stengel, and I said, I want to write a story about why they haven't deported me. He said, what? It's like, hey, if you're gonna do this, you should kind of do this like all the way, right? So he said, okay, sure. I actually called the Department of Homeland Security myself. It's kind of funny, but it's not. Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I'm writing a cover story for Time magazine. I haven't heard from you. Are you going to deport me? Why? Why not? And the woman on the line knew who I was. She said she knew who I was because, I guess this was something that they circulated in the, Department of Homeland Security. And she was like, let me put you on hold. Then she got back on the phone and she said, why are you calling us? And I said, well, I haven't heard from you. What do you want to do with me? What do you want to do with me? She said, we don't comment on individual cases. And I can hear Tom Weber, who's editing my Time cover story, that is not a sufficient answer in my head. All my life, all I ever hear in my head are editors. And so I said, well, I need a comment. I'm writing a cover story. It's 5,000 words. I need a comment from the government. And she said, no comment. Which, in retrospect, I think is actually a metaphor for how most Americans think of us, right? Like, so long as someone is mowing your lawns and babysitting your kids and serving you drinks, no comment. It's not your problem. You're not Mexican. It's not your problem, right? Nothing to do with you. Never mind, when Irish first came here, not first, but during the potato famine when they didn't have papers, they didn't need papers, right? Never mind that when you went through Ellis Island, there was no visa process. All you had to do was show up with your ID and to prove that you're not sick and that you wanted to work here and build a life here. Never mind all of that. So now, mind you, as a journalist, I think I've always been driven by stories. And so in the midst of all of this, I've created an organization. It's called Define American. Notice we didn't call it Define Immigrant. We called it Define American. And our job is, how do we elevate how we talk about this issue and take it out of this political, partisan, border, Mexican, Latino box that for somehow we have stuck it in. Our goal at Define American is to actually humanize this issue and tell you just how not only diverse the undocumented community is, but what we don't even know about this whole issue. How come we don't ever talk about undocumented black people in this country? There's about 700,000 undocumented black immigrants in this country from the Caribbean and Africa. The fastest growing undocumented population are actually coming from Asia, not Mexico, not Latin America, right? Why have we accepted the frame that politicians have given us that these immigrants, quote unquote, just take away from America? That we're the ones, making you unsafe. Never mind the rapists and all that comment, right? I mean, we all know, it's pretty obvious that without undocumented labor in this country, the agricultural economy of this country would collapse. There are 1.8 million undocumented people in the state of Texas. They must know they're there. 2.3 million in California alone. About 95,000 here in Ohio, right? So that's our goal. And for me, getting in the Time magazine cover was a moment that connected to Ellen. I don't know if you guys might be too young to remember this. When I was in high school, there's this comedian who comes out on the cover of Time magazine. Now, at that point in 1997, I knew that I was also gay and that I was here illegally. It was too much to be in two closets at once. So I had to figure out how to get out one of these closets. And thanks to Ellen, when she got on the cover of Time magazine, I actually bought the Time magazine and I hid it in the closet, which is ironic. Because I didn't want my grandparents to see it, right? But then about 6 months after this cover, actually, no, a little more than 6 months after this cover of Ellen, I was sitting in my US history class. Mr. Farrell showed a documentary called The Life and Times of Harvey Milk. And again, I was in the closet about being undocumented and being gay. I was in the closet about being called illegal and faggot, which is the words that people used to call us. And again, I had to come out of one of them, so I raised my hand and told the whole class, I'm gay. But then I figured, at least one closet out, one more to go. But can you remember, I don't know if the people here are older, the gravity of Ellen DeGeneres putting this on Time magazine, right? Which, by the way, just 2 years later, Will and Grace, the #1 show on network television for 7 years was Will and Grace, right? The fact of the matter is, we could not have changed the politics of how people view LGBT rights and LGBT people if we hadn't changed the culture in which people talked about gay people in this country. They're not gay people. They're someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's coworker, someone's boss, someone's classmate, right? So using that same framework, that's what we've done at Define American, is how do we talk about this? Again, take politics aside. And since we are in a room of storytellers, what are the stories here, right? And to me, what I love about stories is that it's so beyond right and wrong, legal or illegal. It's all gray area, right? So we actually did this video to support our coming out campaign at Define American, which is a little counterintuitive. Since last summer, we have asked undocumented people who are ready, who feel like they're ready, to publicly come out, right? And we'll help you. We'll help you talk to the Chicago Tribune. In a couple of months, we're helping an undocumented Korean guy in Arizona who's actually a lawyer. So you're gonna hear about that case come out. We have helped a guy actually who's in the DC area. He's been training people like Tony Kornheiser. He's a personal trainer to like all these, Tony Kornheiser, pardon the interruption. And we help him come out in the Washington Post. So again, this is a risky thing to do, but we team up with lawyers, right? We help people kind of figure out how to tell their story. And this is our way of not only helping the media better cover the issue, right? But our own way of, again, humanizing this very political issue. So this is a video that we released about a year ago.
I'm coming out to show that we are your neighbors, your coworkers, your classmates, and your friends.
I'm coming out because I refuse to stand on the sidelines while others accomplish change.
I am coming out for my son so that we can be safe and together.
I'm coming out now because the person that is me cannot be defined by a piece of paper.
We must destroy the myths once and for all, shatter them. You must tell your friends if indeed they are your friends. You must tell your neighbors. You must tell the people you work with. You must tell the people in the stores you shop in. We must continue to speak out. And most importantly, we must come out.
Coming out takes many forms, but it always requires courage.
It's time. It's time for all of us.
Employers,
Employees,
Teachers,
students,
families,
neighbors,
Americans,
Allies, to overcome shame,
to overcome fear,
to document,
and define ourselves.
We are coming out to be seen for who we are, not only as undocumented immigrants, but as Americans. Come out. Join us. at defineamerican.com. One of the successes of Define American has been how it's inspired people from outside this country. We've heard from people in the Netherlands, in Germany, given what's happening in Europe with the migrant crisis. Define French, define Danish, define German. This question of citizenship and this question of who gets to move and why. And by the way, we in the media have largely failed, particularly in the broadcast media, of talking about this issue that we're not even really talking about the broader questions, right? That in this age of globalization, in the digital and social media era, migration is one of the defining human rights issues of the 21st century. Around the world, there are an estimated 244 million people, about 3.3% of the population of the world, who are migrants, who live outside of the country that they were born in. That's the most ever in the history of this world. We don't know how many of them are unauthorized or illegal or undocumented, but we know that there's about 277, right? 244 million. Now, why do these people move, right? We're not moving here because we like being called criminals and illegals, right? And by the way, why does my iPhone have more migrant rights than I do? I find it really interesting that this could be created in China, can be in New York, and then it gets to, Cupertino, where the headquarters of Apple is, and now with me. Why is it that my tweet can go anywhere, and yet I can't? Now, I'm not talking about open borders. I'm just asking some questions here. And the bigger questions that we are not even really talking about is, what does U.S. foreign policy and U.S. trade agreements have to do with migration patterns? What did NAFTA do, not only to America, but to Mexico? So I'm Filipino. There's about 4 million Filipinos in the United States. We're one of the largest immigrant groups here. It's actually Mexicans, Chinese, then Filipinos, right? There's 2 million of us just in California. I was at an event in Nebraska a few months ago, and this man said, rather belligerently, "Why are there so many of you here? So many Filipinos here?" And I said, "Well, sir, we are here because you were there. We are here because you were there. The Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War, when you all took the Philippines and we became the protectorate of the United States. We were like Puerto Rico because, you wanted a view to China. Do you remember that time? How dare you ask me why I'm here if you don't know how you got here? Do you know how you got here? Well, what were the sacrifices? What papers did you have? What laws were in place? Now, migration is not an Asian Latino issue, it's an American issue. Unless you're a Native American or a Black American who was forced to come here to build this country for free, right? You must ask that question of how you got here. And for us, the words that we use in the media to frame this issue is incredibly, incredibly crucial. Can you think of any other issue, right, in the American public in which we refer to a group of people as illegal? When you're driving without a license, right, or when you're drunk driving, we don't call you illegal driver, we call you drunk driver, right? But in this country, the term illegal to describe a person has been synonymous with immigrants. Mind you, to be here illegally is actually a civil offense and not a criminal one, right? People's immigration status are fluid. So my mom is in a 16-year waiting list to come here. So when she gets here, because she's from the Philippines, a third world country, I haven't seen her since I was 12, so it's 23 years. If she were a French woman and she wanted to go see Hamilton over the weekend, all she would have to do is buy a plane ticket and she's here. But if you come from Nigeria or Guatemala or India or the Philippines, sorry, no luck. Now, what does that have to do with privilege and class and race, right? So for us, words matter. This is really a campaign that we launched almost 4 years ago after the Time magazine cover happened. This is our challenge to journalists, really. Again, I'm not being politically correct here. I am here illegally. Border Patrol can come over here right now and arrest me if they wanted to. But I, as a person, am not illegal because people cannot be illegal. Can we all agree on that? And again, this is not a matter of political correctness or playing words. I'm a journalist. I've written, 1,500 articles since I was a teenager. Words matter, of course they do. Words matter because they frame the conversation. Words matter because it actually gives us a space to make sure that we're looking at issues as completely and as humanely and as fairly as possible. For me, this really hit a peak when I got arrested in Texas 2 summers ago at the border in Texas. It was only 8 hours, but I was detained for 8 hours, and I was put in the exact same jail cell, because it is a jail cell, it's not a detention center, it's a jail, with the kids. Remember when those Central American kids started walking, right? In this country, we can't even tell refugees from immigrants. We are so lost when we talk about this issue that we can't even call these kids refugees. We call them what? The illegal children, right? You know who the illegal children were? 7, maybe to 14-year-old boys and girls locked in a jail cell because we can't face our own history and we can't seem to want to have uncomfortable conversations. So for us, words matter leads to facts, right? Ooh, facts. This is my favorite part. Did you know that in this country, undocumented people actually not only pay taxes, I've been paying taxes since I started working, but we actually contribute to Social Security. The chief actuary of the Social Security Administration, we call it a primary source, actually said to Vice News that undocumented workers have contributed more than $100 billion into the Social Security Fund in the past decade. I myself, about 140,000. Now I remember, because you get a thing that tells you how much you've contributed, and I remember when I first got that thing, I kept thinking, wait, they know that the number is not supposed to be eligible for work, so why are they taking it? Oh, they want the money. Oh, okay. And then, do I get any of it back? No. According to the Social Security Administration, undocumented workers, the same people that we call a bunch of illegals and criminals, have actually helped keep Social Security solvent. Isn't that interesting? By the way, is this stat something you see anywhere? Fox, CNN, New York Times, right? Did you know that in this country, since 9/11, we have invested more than $100 billion in border security? Now, a country has a right to define and defend its borders. I totally, absolutely get that. One of the reasons why I came out is I was completely confused. If we really cared about national security, wouldn't we want to know who's here? How come I was able to go to the White House with my fake Social Security number and no one seemed to know that it was fake? I didn't understand that, right? But $100 billion, protecting you from what exactly? From Chipotle? What are we protecting you from again? Are the Mexicans, are we the ones causing all this terrorism? I'm not even Mexican, but people seem to think I am. And how many more billions of dollars do you want to spend securing the border that's never going to be fully secure? So long as parents have to feed their kids, they will cross whatever border you put in front of them. Right? And for me, as someone who's been studying this and living this idea that there are actually more Americans going to Mexico than Mexicans going to the United States, that actually illegal border crossings from Mexico to the United States are at its lowest level since the 1970s. Again, these are facts, and I'm shuddering to think about what's going to happen on Monday when they talk about national security and what Lester Holt, bless him, is going to be able to get out there in terms of facts. And again, as someone who's from the Philippines, the reality that Asian people in this country are actually the fastest growing immigrant group, documented and undocumented. Yet when you hear reports and studies, I don't know, do we not exist? It's like we're like a side note or something, right? I find that really interesting. All the states in the South right now, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arkansas, Alabama, they are all undergoing these dramatic demographic shifts of both not only Latino immigrants, but Asian immigrants. Yet for the most part, they have not been as part of a conversation as they need to be. And for me, as someone who's trying to humanize this issue, what's really been lacking is how we talk about not only immigrants, but the people who work with them. So this is a guy named Peter Pearl. Kelly is smiling. Awesome, Kelly. So this is a guy that quite literally saved me. When I got hired at the Washington Post in 2004, right out of college, I started freaking out because for a lot of reasons. One, I thought I had taken someone's job, because that gets, the media says that all these illegal people are taking someone's job. So when I got the job, I'm like, God, maybe I did take someone's job. So I was really, torn about that. And then it was one thing to be undocumented at the San Francisco Chronicle. It's a whole other thing to be undocumented in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Post, 3 blocks from the White House. About 4 months after getting hired, I thought I needed to tell somebody. I didn't know. I just thought I should go tell somebody, right? And he was assigned to me as my mentor, and he would always buy me like a caramel macchiato from the Starbucks. He was so nice to me, and I figured, hey, tell Peter Pearl. So I took him for a long walk at Lafayette Park, which in retrospect, I should not have done. That was right in front of the White House. That was a bad decision. Took him for a walk, and then I told him everything. I told him about the fake driver's license, the fake green card, the fake papers. I lied on the form to get the job, the internship, all of that. I said everything to him. And then I expected him to say, we got to report you to HR now. That's what I thought he was going to say. Oh, at the time, he was, when I first met him, he was a writer and an editor. At this time, he was actually part of senior management. He was in a senior management position, as Kelly remembers. And so I didn't expect him, I expected him to report me to HR or to go to Len Downey, who was editor of the paper. Instead, he said 2 things. The first thing, he said, "You make so much more sense now." Apparently, you could really tell how anxious I was. Like, he was like, you're walking around like a planet is like on your back. First thing he said. The second thing he said, which really surprised me, I did not expect it from him. He said, "Shh, don't tell anybody else. Just keep going. Don't tell anybody else. Just keep going." That was maybe a 20, 25-second split decision that he had to make. So when I was here in Ohio covering Sarah Palin, I would usually call Peter. When we found out that I was part of the team that won a Pulitzer, I'm like, Peter, doesn't the Pulitzer people know that the number is fake? Like, because they asked for a social security number. When I got assigned to cover the White House state dinner for the Japanese prime minister, and I had to go to the White House, I was like, how am I going to get through security? I told Peter. I burdened this man. Burden. And after I told him this in October 2004. You know what he did? He invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. My first Thanksgiving in Washington, D.C. was with his family. I think how many other people are doing this for people like me? Mechanics, engineers, I don't know, students. How many other Peter Pearls are all around this country that we don't even hear about? They have to make these choices because the government can't make up its mind, right? He's a big part of this story. And for the most part, the media hasn't really told this story. It's too complex. It's not the nut graph. It's like maybe the 4th or 5th, right? It's not that easy to tell. But he is as much a part of the story as anybody else. He's like my high school principal, who was the first person I told that I was here illegally, and she said, we'll get you a college scholarship, don't worry about it, right? So how many other teachers and principals are doing that all across this country? Right? And for me, they're the reason why I'm here. Peter Pearl could have easily said, okay, that's it, we're going to report you now. My principal, Pat Hyland, could have easily said, oops, sorry, can't go to college, right? To me, they're as much a part of the story as anybody else. And this woman, that's my mom, I don't really know, there hasn't been an actual statistic from Pew or from anybody reputable of how many immigrants in this country are separated from loved ones. So we're waiting for her to get here, 16 more years, according to immigration. What I do know is there are about 5,000 young people in this country who are US citizens who have lost both their parents to deportation. 5,000 kids in foster care because both parents have gotten deported. There's about 4 million US citizen kids who have at least one undocumented parent. What we do know is, because I know this, is when people die and they can't leave to go to Guatemala or Nigeria or Korea, people Skype and Facebook Live to attend funerals. That's what people do. And what we do know is that this is the human toll of migration. that is so not at all a part of how we talk about this issue. And coming to that, given that this is Ohio, a swing state, right? This state is home to about estimated 480,000 immigrants, the size of Atlanta. About 90,000 of those are undocumented, right? What I've realized traveling around this country nonstop, again, I'm a reporter at heart, so I've been kind of busy. I've done more than 850 events in 48 states, visited maybe 350 college campuses, talked to as many Republicans and Tea Party conservative people I possibly can. There's nobody that I will not talk to. And what I've realized is immigration by far is the most controversial yet least understood issue in America. In many ways, again, I'm neither a Republican nor a Democrat. I can't vote. I don't know why people think we can vote. I can't tell you how many times people come up to me at airports, because I go on Fox News a lot, so people recognize me at airports, and they're like, hey, who are you gonna vote for? You're gonna vote for Hillary. What am I gonna vote with, my Bank of America debit card? Like, I have no papers, what am I gonna vote with, right? So it's astounding to me that in this country, not only have we not really told the undocumented story, we haven't really told how the immigrant story in this country is fully changing what we look like as a country and where we're going. Meaning this, in the past 50 years, according to Pew, 55% of the total population growth in America came from mostly Latino and Asian immigrants. 55%. I live in California. 51% of all kids 25 and under in the state of California is Latino. In Los Angeles, where I live, 72% of all women in Los Angeles are women of color. 72%. In the next 50 years, according to Pew, 88% of the total population growth of America is gonna come from mostly Latinos and Asians. 88%. Now, while we as a country and while we in the journalism industry are still grappling with the white and black dynamic, it's gonna get a whole lot more complicated. If you think about it, the country is only gonna get gayer. It's only gonna get more Asian, more Latino, more black. More women of all racial and ethnic backgrounds will have, to cross whatever barriers there are left to cross. So what's left, by the way? Straight white men. This is where it gets a little uncomfortable. The question here becomes, how much change can heterosexual white men handle? I'm actually working on a documentary precisely on this. I'm not gonna give you the title yet of the film. It's a follow-up to a documentary I made for MTV called White People. And it's about, because to me, when I travel around the country, what I find really distressing is how many young straight white men come up to me afterwards, just one-on-one, and say that sometimes I feel like I can't really say anything out loud because I'm either gonna be racist, homophobic, or sexist, so I don't say anything at all. I don't think that's healthy. I don't believe in censorship. I don't believe that, although I do agree that there is a need for safe spaces, especially in colleges, I think what is even more important are more honest conversations, face to face. We can no longer afford a time in which people of color usually only talk amongst ourselves about diversity and don't include white people in the conversation. Now that white people are actually an emerging racial minority, which is the reality already in the state of California, right? We need a whole new conversation about immigration and race and identity. And because this country is still not deporting me, I'm trying to keep busy. So I started my own media startup called Emerging Us. It's launching pretty soon. You'll hear about it pretty soon. So this is a video-centric media company all about the emerging American identity. To me, one of the most exciting things about journalism is the marriage of documentary filmmaking and personal-driven narratives in the age of social media. So that's what this is about. What it's also about is breaking down kind of the stereotypes and the archetypes that people think when they think about people of color and when they think about white people. So here's the quick trailer for it. Please follow us and all those things so you can be the first people to hear the news. We're looking for interns, and I pay. I don't believe in unpaid internships. So if you want to check that out, let us know. So right now in this country, I am an undocumented entrepreneur. I run a nonprofit called Define American. It has about 12 employees. Emerging Us has about 8. I am happily employing 20 American citizens in this country. So don't think that we are not adding to the economy, because we are. In some ways, Emerging Us is what I've been working towards my entire journalism career. I'm really, really nervous about it. But hey, right? Risk-taking, risks and failure is as much a big part of success as anything else. So I completely believe in that. One last thing I want to talk about before Kelly and I talk is I get asked a lot of questions. Questions like, why don't you just make yourself legal? I'm a masochist. This is so much more fun, you know? Isn't that amazing that people actually ask that question? That people think all I have to do is go to City Hall, fill out a form, and before you know it, I'm taking away your Social Security or something, right? Questions like, why aren't you Mexican? I don't know. When you see an Asian person, an Asian-looking person with a Hispanic name, it means they're Filipino. It's called colonialism. There's 100 million of us, so that's a really good tip. So since I get asked all these questions, the only question that I really ask everybody that I talk to is this question of citizenship. A few months ago, Bill O'Reilly had me on his show, and he said, hey, Jose, just so you know, you don't deserve to be here. Okay. I knew that since I was a kid. Since I was a kid sitting in a classroom in high school and people talk about us like we're insects off your backs. I knew that. So I think, you know, I have to earn it, right? And this idea that people like me should earn our citizenship. So I would really respectfully and politely ask, what are you all doing to earn yours? What have you done to earn yours? All I've been doing is this. My journalism is my way of citizenship. You know, this question of what does social justice mean to me is a question of what does citizenship mean to me. And to me, it means that I can't be this undocumented gay Latino name with an Asian face with a Latino name who majored in African American studies. I'm all these things, right? But I can't just care about immigrant rights, whatever that may be, or LGBT rights. My existence is tied to your existence, right? Our equalities are tied to each other. That's what citizenship means to me. Thank you for having me here.
I know that you guys have lots of questions, so I'm not going to ask a lot of questions of my own. Jan, remind me of the time that I'm shooting for. 1:45 I have, okay, great. Excellent. She's in charge. Really, she's in charge. 1:30, okay, great. Okay, no worries, because we're going to kill it here. So, okay, all right. You guys just heard I have special dispensation. Okay, so you are clearly a high achiever, right? I mean, like, no. And I'm going to make a point here, and I want you to think about this. And then I want you guys all to think about how you get to be a high achiever. But I want to bring out some of the things that make you a high achiever. So you said that the expectation was not from your family that you would go to college and that you would do all these things. No. So how did that happen? How did you get that in your head that you were going to college?
The public library.
Okay.
I love the library. It's like my favorite thing. When I was growing up, because there was no Google, so Google was like the library. I don't know, you know, when you started watching like Frederick Wiseman documentaries and you discover the journalism aisle in the library, and then you read Philip Graham.
You know, when you did that.
When you did that, you know, Philip Graham he bought the Washington Post in auction, and he said that journalism is the first draft of history. By the way, journalism, I just kind of fell into it. I thought I wanted to be Mike Nichols, you know, the director, Mike Nichols. I wanted to make films. But when I found out I was here illegally, I realized that it meant I didn't have the right papers to be here. So then I thought, well, if my name was on the paper,
That'll work.
That'll
That's
work,
totally
right?
paper.
Like
That's
meaning,
a
you know, when you
paper.
write a story, there's a byline, right?
Right.
So I figured if my name was a byline in a piece of paper, that meant I existed. So I figured I should just keep doing that. So that's what I did. That's why I just literally fell into it.
So it is that, it's sort of like that thing that made you a journalist is that natural curiosity. And it
Yes.
was that natural curiosity that exposed you to the broader world. And then you started aspiring to these things, right?
Yes.
To go to college, to work at a newspaper, to work at the Washington Post. How old were you when you were hired by the Post?
Right out of college.
So 21? 20?
No, 22.
22?
22, yeah.
Okay. So there is this thing with high achievers that some high achievers are really afraid of risk. They are risk averse, right? Like as a high achiever, once you get to a certain, think about it as gambling, right? You put all of your bets on your own achievement. And you got to the point where you were clearly achieving. You were at the Washington Post.
Actually, for me, it was the New Yorker. When I got published in the New Yorker, since I was a kid, you know the New Yorker, the magazine? Everything I ever learned about writing, I learned from the New Yorker. I think the way I use semicolons, I learned from the New Yorker. So I thought if you get published in the New Yorker and you're at one of those really long-ass profiles, then you've made it, right? So I did.
And that was
Zuckerberg.
after,
That was
though,
after the Post.
After you came out.
No, it was before.
It was before you
Actually,
came
the
out.
last thing I did before I came out was I profiled Mark Zuckerberg for the New Yorker, and then 7 months later, I came out.
Okay, so how did you clear that hurdle? Because when we were talking earlier today, one of the points that I made is it takes great personal courage to do social justice journalism. And I think it took great personal courage for you to come out.
It did. You know, I just got to the point where it was two questions. It was either, do I just leave? Like, you know, self-deport Mitt Romney style, before that term came up. Because, you know, if you all don't want me, if you don't want us, maybe we should just leave. Because I can be a writer anywhere, right? But then I thought that would have been a cowardly thing to do. I thought about that for a good 2 weeks because I was getting excited about, hey, you know, maybe I'll go back to the Philippines and then I come out from the Philippines and I sell a book about it, whatever, right? I thought that would be like the safer route. But then the more I thought about that, and you know, my thesis paper in college, as I said, I was an African American Studies major. My thesis paper was on SNCC.
On what?
On SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Right.
I just thought I was in this position where I could actually have some kind of impact, and how could I not go down that route? So that took longer because it took a lot of lawyering to figure out how to do it.
Okay.
But you know, I got to tell you, I mean, it's funny, like what I thought was a risk ended up being the most liberating thing I've ever done. Like in some ways, I felt like my career just started 5 years ago.
After you came out.
After I came out, yeah.
So I think there's a lesson to be learned in, first of all, setting the goal to be a high achiever, which I think is so important. If you're going to make a difference, you got to do it well, right? Like whatever you're doing, you have to do really well. You have to be a high achiever. There is no mediocre making a difference.
But why be a mediocre journalist?
Exactly.
You know, actually, when I meet young people now, and I can kind of tell that they're being lazy about it, I just tell them to like get out of journalism. Like, please do us all a favor. Like, don't do it. If your heart is really not in it, like if you're not going to be up at 12, you know, at midnight, like actually doing a second edit or going to do the 14th interview, right? Don't do it. If you only care about your personal brand, whatever that means, don't do it, right? Like, you know, Jan made the point about journalism being my church. I sincerely believe that. I believe that this is at the heart of our democracy and how we make sense of ourselves. And to me, what's really painful is how many young people get into this business, this public trust, without really understanding its history and the role that it has beyond the self, right? The other thing that's really, for me, been frustrating is how many young people, I love young people, you're wonderful, you're my nieces and nephews, it's great. But like mentorship and like respecting experience and maturity, you know, like I'm always stunned when I meet young people and I ask them, well, who's mentoring you? And they're like, oh, you got to do that, right? Like, yeah, technology and all of that. At the end of the day, nothing replaces content. Nothing replaces the work. Like, that's what you really have to put in it.
So the other thing that I want to ask you, and if you guys want the mic, you should raise your hands because they'll be coming around very quickly. So you reminded me right before we started talking about that Peter Pearl article that I did. So Jose comes out, and in journalism, we're all at Twitter because a masthead level editor at the Washington Post apparently kept secret that one of their front level star employees was undocumented, had lied on his
Form.
application. And I'm the ethicist, right? So I'm supposed to talk to Peter Pearl about this.
I remember the headlines, and I try not to read them. All the media critics. How can how do you ever trust a liar? I actually remember the Asian American Journalism Association that I was a part of at the time actually issued the statement, basically saying we don't agree with what he did.
Right.
It was all these judgmental things that I thought were really interesting.
But what I loved so I was fascinated at the position that Peter was in, and that quote that you had on your slide was from that article that I wrote about Peter.
I just realized that, by the way.
And so I did this article, and I encourage you to look it up because really Peter did this article. I extensively quoted him. And what Pearl essentially did in that moment.
25 seconds. 25
Yeah,
seconds
was
long.
I tried to take all the readers into his head in that moment, but he essentially transferred all that responsibility that you were carrying to some of it to himself, as well as the potential for harm, right? And here's how Peter Pearl described. Here's the extended quote. Peter said. This was not a close call. It was clear to me that I believed that my taking action would have resulted in him losing his job and maybe being deported. And I felt like at his age and in his situation, that as much as I trust the leadership of the Washington Post, they would have been obligated to put in motion a whole series of events that were clearly going to result in real damage to Jose. And I made a tactical judgment. It seemed clear to me that he was okay in his current status. He had a valid driver's license. As long as he didn't attempt to travel outside the country or get, arrested for a crime or whatever, he could do this indefinitely. He basically wanted to unburden himself, and I said, "You've done the right thing. Now it's our problem. I'll take care of it." And I was like, great, what was I going to do now? But that was, so that's like, you think about the moral courage that it takes. He made a calculation, and he realized that on the two ends of this spectrum are your career and this broader institutional knowledge that the Post had.
And mind you, when I came out, I didn't just out myself, I outed all of these people.
Right.
My grandfather who got the fake papers, my high school principal,
Peter.
and Peter. But I actually did not want Peter to be in it. Because I wasn't sure what the Washington Post would do if they found out. So I told him, hey, Peter, you don't have to be in this at all. I don't have to say your name. But he was the one, he actually went to the editor above my head and said, I want to be in it.
And he went to the New York Times?
No, he went to the Washington Post.
Oh, to the Post. Okay.
Originally, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think that, so I just think that is a moment, and reading Peter's thoughts about making the decision in that moment, I think it's a moment where he put in motion the scenario where you could eventually come out and do it as a thought leader on the issue, as opposed to somebody who's being deported.
Yeah.
So I just think that there's a moment there that we need to pay attention to. So, okay, your questions. Yep.
Hi, is this on?
Yeah,
This
I
is
can
not
hear you.
really a question, but I would like to thank you for what you did, and I would like to take this opportunity to come out myself. I am undocumented immigrant, and I've basically lived your life for the last 18 years. I came to this country with my parents.
Wait a second. Do you have a lawyer?
It's fine.
Okay.
Okay. I moved here when I was 13 with my parents. We overstayed our visa, and pretty much the rest has been history. So, thank you.
Okay.
That certainly has happened to you before.
A lot. Just not in a setting like that. Happens a lot, just not in a journalism setting. Okay, we'll talk, man. I have a card.
All right, who's got the mic? Okay, Shoshana.
Hi, Jose.
Hi.
You did something very brave and risky.
Can you hold on for 1 second?
Sure.
So, if anything happens, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next, I have 17 lawyers helping me figure this out because I go criticizing Trump a lot and he made an example of him. So if anything happens, this man just told all you that. So can you just have his back if
Yeah.
anything happens? Okay, great.
Good
Awesome.
job.
So I want to make sure we're clear on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, you've inspired people to come out, as we just saw, and it's very brave. It's a very brave and risky thing to do, and I am wondering if there have been any legal repercussions for some of the individuals who've come out.
By the way, I try not to think of it in that terms of being brave or courageous. I just think, it's funny because, again, I've done this coming out thing twice. I'm not doing it any of the other ones. I'm done. But we're not really coming out, right? We're just letting you in, right? Coming out, that's about you. Coming in, we're just letting you in. We're just telling you what it's like, right? So for me, it became this necessary thing that I had to do. I literally could not. No one was threatening to out me. I wasn't like Jason Blair, where someone discovered. Oh my God, Jason Blair. No one was trying to
analogy.
A bad analogy.
Yeah.
Bad analogy.
Yeah.
By the way, I grew up in the generation of Jason Blair, and I remember when that whole thing happened, every young journalist of color was like, "Oh, shoot, we're screwed," right? So that's the context there. But for me, my career was fine. Actually, it was, I was actually about to do a book on Zuckerberg, and I just felt like, man, I'm gonna do a book on Zuckerberg, and then I don't even tell him that I'm here legally. I can't keep doing this. So it got to the point where I just couldn't keep lying to all of my friends. Literally 9 people knew. My friends would have weddings and go to Mexico, and I'm like, oh, I just can't go to Mexico. I don't like people, or the Washington Post wanted to send me to Iraq to be a war correspondent, and I had to come up with a reason as to why I did not want to be a foreign correspondent during wartime. So I just got to that point. So far, not yet. Meaning, I actually think the media that we've been helping people with has actually given them some protection, because we've been able to rally communities around people, right? And again, do that same thing where the teacher, the coworker, right? It becomes about a community coming out in a way. So thankfully, there hasn't been any repercussions. Now, what that would look like in a Trump presidency, I have no idea.
Yeah. All right. It's on. It just takes a couple seconds.
Thank you. I'll just share a personal history from the other side so that you understand how arbitrary is the legal system dealing with immigration in the U.S. I was fortunate enough to be born in a country where people can leave and enter the U.S. Doesn't matter how you enter. You can enter by boat, you can enter by foot, you can enter by plane, and you're immediately given refugee status. And that country is Cuba.
Yep.
I was very fortunate because that meant that me and all my relatives, all my extended family, from day one, were here legally and had all the opportunities that are offered to anyone who's entered into the U.S., who is born in the U.S. So it's just so you realize it shouldn't be determined by your age.
Yep.
Shouldn't make any difference if you were brought here as a child or you decided you made that decision on your own as an adult. Shouldn't matter. Shouldn't matter where you were born at. Shouldn't matter if you were born in Cuba or in the Philippines or in Guatemala or in El Salvador. Shouldn't matter. You should all be given the same opportunities to be incorporated into the economic structure of this country, into the political structure of this country, and the social structure of this country, if you want this to be a great country.
That sort of gets...
Sorry, this is the journalist in me. The other side of that would be, why don't you just do it the right way? Right? I hear that all the time, and I would love to do it the right way. If you think people like me should wait 15, 20 years to be a U.S. citizen, okay. If you think that's how long it should take, I have no power here. So, okay, sure. But again, while you do that, can we actually have this bigger conversation about what really defines citizenship? When I finally get these pieces of papers, they're not going to make me any more citizen than I already am, right?
Right, and that gets at just the complicated structures that we're talking about. We want to oversimplify this problem for the sake of a tweet or a headline or some easy discussion to have on television, but it's complicated, right? The systems that have been set up, who gets in, how many people get in from what region or what country, how long it takes. Yeah, all of that is so complicated.
But by the way, this is where responsible, accurate, fair journalism is absolutely needed. You know, I would love for Defiant Americans to actually partner with an institution that we literally just make this our goal. Because again, all these undocumented people, so I'm part of a mixed status family, which means that out of 36 people in this country, of my family, relatives, cousins, nephews, uncles, grandmothers, I'm the only one of 36 who's undocumented. That's a mixed status family. There are 17 million people who live in such a family, right? So we're really talking about the broader immigration issue and not just this little one. In the media, unfortunately, it's been, I can't get the New York Times and the Washington Post to stop calling people illegal. I can't even get them to do that.
Yeah, right. AP did though, right?
Associated Press, thankfully, that was in 2012 now. Unfortunately, all these newspapers haven't followed suit.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's do 2 more questions. Who's got the mic? Nobody's got the mic. Oh, here we go.
Hello, thank you very much for coming. I am also an immigrant to this country.
We have a lot of immigrants in this room. Awesome.
I'm fortunate enough to be documented, but if I can share, it is no more security being on the legal end, just because of how incredibly challenging and expensive it is to stay legal.
Yes.
And what I wish for anybody who is engaging in social activism, journalism, looking at the immigration issue, is that they can explain the complexity of the entirety of it in such a way that we get the general public to come out against the immigration system and how unilaterally unfair it is to everyone, documented or undocumented, who is trying to navigate.
And how outdated it is.
Absolutely.
You know, like for me, that's the crazy thing about all of this. How are we going to grow our economy if we have this system that is so labyrinth and it doesn't make sense? Like we are deporting people with actual college degrees who want to start businesses here and employ people. That doesn't make sense.
Right. I mean, those of you who are managers in newsrooms, if you've tried to hire somebody from outside the country, it is insanely expensive. And so, I mean, a very good friend of mine, she had worked for us at Poynter, and the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel tried to hire her. She's a developer and a graphic artist. They went through 2 rounds with immigration to try and get a work visa for her, and they failed, and she had to leave the country because she can't get a work permit.
I would estimate, by the way, that maybe about 30 journalists who are working journalists in positions across the industry have come out to me, but are not ready yet to
come out publicly.
Come out.
Yeah.
By the way, this is the current issue of Los Angeles magazine, dedicated entirely to immigration from cover to cover, 82 pages. The first time ever a magazine devoted an entire issue to it. Emerging Us helped produce it.
Nice, nice. All right, one more question. Who's got the mic? Oh, right here, Katie. Yeah, but they can't hear you on the stream. You can't be that loud.
That loud. So sometimes, getting back to the ethics questions, sometimes people treat activism and journalism as, the ultimate dirty phrase. So as someone who has taken an activist approach in some situations, not in all of your journalism, but how do you walk that line, and what sort of ethical considerations do you engage in to make sure that you're getting it right?
Oh,
that it
I'm
can
so
be done
glad
right?
you asked this question. It's been kind of uncomfortable. I've been in some situations where, somebody would say, I would be doing something, a panel like this, and somebody would say, the former journalist, Jose Antonio Vargas, and current immigration activist. Okay, so am I an immigration activist because this is my life? Right? I mean, I find it really interesting, again, this idea of who gets to frame that and who gets to define that conversation, right? Like, I find it interesting, for example, I remember, this is something I've been thinking about for decades now. I find it interesting that when a person of color or a woman or a gay person does something, it's called, having an opinion and having a bias or an agenda, right? I remember when I was a reporter for the Washington Post, and I ended up doing a year-long series on AIDS in DC, and one of the editors who I really respected stopped by my desk and said, you don't want to be the gay AIDS reporter, Jose, do you? That's not how you're gonna make it up in the ladder here at the Post. I thought it was an interesting comment, and that it seemed that if I was advocating for it, and then but when someone like David Brooks does it, it's an analysis, right? What I've realized in the past 5 years is I really have no control over how people describe me or my work. The only thing I have control over is the work. So I try not to because I mean, the first year, I remember when I was writing the cover story for Time Magazine, and they were like, this is an act of journalism. This is not advocacy. They were the ones going like, well, what are we doing? What are we doing? I don't care what you call it. I just want 36 undocumented people on the cover of Time Magazine. That's all I want. So this is, especially now in this era of Black Lives Matter, and how that gets interpreted, I just think it's really important that we rid ourselves of our own biases and our own kind of mindsets and try to figure out, well, why do people think that way? I always thought that the greatest gift that journalism ever gave me is empathy, right? Like, there isn't anybody I couldn't empathize with. My job is to sit in front of somebody and try to make sense as to why they think and why they feel the way that they feel. Not to invalidate what they're thinking or feeling, but to try to figure out how they got there. And so that's what I've been trying to do.
Nice. All right. Thank
Great.
you very much.
Thank you for having me.